Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Sakura was trying hard not to be annoying. At first, the silence between them felt so awkward that she felt compelled to engage Sasuke in some sort of conversation. She began asking him questions about Kagaya and he answered them all, including one particular truth that Sakura had not known. Apparently, it was the reason why Sasuke had come back home to the village in the first place. It was about the White Zetsu army that Kagaya had created by using the chakra from the God Tree. Sasuke disclosed to her that Kagaya created the army to fight something else, a force stronger than the United Shinobi of the war. Sasuke added that he wasn't exactly sure what this threat was, but that it was something to be feared if Kagaya had felt so threatened by it that she created an army in preparation of it. It's my goal, he said, giving her a sideways glance, to eliminate this threat. I'll do whatever it takes. For the first time, Sakura realized the gravity of Sasuke's mission and a combination of anger and appreciation arose in her being for the role Sasuke was playing. Anger, because he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, his redemption for all his mistakes in the past. It just didn't seem fair, Sakura thought, for Sasuke to have to do this on his own. Appreciation, because Sasuke was doing what had to be done to protect the peace they had all fought so hard for in the Fourth Shinobi World War. Why didn't you tell me? She asked seriously, scanning the back of his head as he walked a couple steps in front of her. She felt that she had just as much right as Naruto to know what exactly was keeping Sasuke from coming home. Back in the village, you could have told me. He was silent for a moment before his quiet voice reached her in the dark. I didn't want to worry you. Whether or not that was true, she didn't question him. It was better to believe that than the worries in her mind of him simply not caring enough to tell her. And then, she stopped talking altogether. She backed off the unrelated questions when Sasuke's answers became short, and then turned to the usual, HNS. She knew he was trying, but that he was struggling to participate in a conversation where he was forced to small talk. He had been on his own for so long, Sakura realized, that of course he wasn't going to be as talkative as she hoped. It was her own desire to talk to him that had her blabbing. She stopped, and did her best just to be comfortable with the mutual silence. As long as she was at his side, she told herself, it didn't matter if he was his usual quiet and reserved self. Instead of talking his ear off, Sakura gazed up at the stars that peeked through the black treetops and thought of all the questions she wanted to ask him. She had a million, but tried her best to discard the questions that came to mind that involved some of his shadier actions during his time apart from Team 7. Questions like, did you ever think about us when you were away with Orochimaru? She knew the answer, and instantly put the question in the back of her mind because she didn't want to hear it spoken out loud. After about 30 minutes of her silence, Sasuke stopped when they reached a small clearing between the forest trees and motioned to the soft, green grass. He sat her bag gently down and said, we have a while yet, before we reach the land of River's border. Rest now, and we'll continue after the sun has risen. Oh, Sakura stammered, walking towards him and leaning over her bag to undo the strap. Of course, she didn't bother packing a sleeping bag. The weather was growing warmer by the day and Sakura knew that it would be more trouble lugging it around than it was worth. So she awkwardly placed her bag under head as she reclined along the soft grass. Sasuke nodded and turned, which had Sakura leaning toward his direction, perched up on her elbow. What? You're not resting? Sasuke continued to walk away from her until he stopped next to a large oak tree a few feet away. He sat, perched his back against its trunk, and stared off into the darkness. I'll keep watch for now. I'll wake you when it's your turn. Oh, she said, feeling both guilty and a little selfish for not even thinking of offering to do so herself, first. Are you sure? I don't mind to. Just rest, he said resolutely, crossing his arms as he continued to gaze out into the blackness that surrounded them. Give me an hour or two, then wake me. she said shyly, knowing there was no arguing with that stern voice and fixed posture. She turned to rest on her back. I'll take over so you can sleep, too. HNN, she heard him hum. She couldn't help but feel like his mood was increasingly growing sour by the minute, whether it be because she had talked his ear off earlier, or that he was simply needing sleep, she couldn't tell. She decided to stare up at the stars for a few more minutes before summoning the jutsu to her fingertips that helped her fall asleep quickly. Without it, she would be a tossing ragdoll of nerves that never got any sleep. Looking up at the stars, she thought of another question she'd like to ask Sasuke, before falling into a deep, chakra-induced sleep. The last thing Sasuke would do was wake her up. He felt like a selfish prick when he heard Sakura yawn. At first, he was appreciative of her questions. It kept him focused on his goal, his mission to annihilate the Otsutsuki race. After the 20th question, Sasuke's eyes began to twitch. He had forgotten what it was like to be on a mission with anyone other than himself, and the effort required to keep up a conversation was jarring. Then she just completely stopped talking, which had Sasuke mentally retracing his steps, wondering what he had done wrong to make her withdraw suddenly. Did he sigh out loud? He couldn't remember. And then, she yawned and Sasuke wanted to kick himself. Of course, she was tired. He had purposefully stayed up late to leave the village at 2 a.m. and they had been walking for hours. Now, as he leaned against the trunk of a tree, Sasuke reminded himself that he was going to have to be more thoughtful as long as his pink-haired teammate accompanied him on his journey. Whereas Sasuke's body was wound tightly and all he wanted to do was to keep moving, he was going to have to keep in mind that Sakura had other needs. He couldn't just do as he felt anymore. Sasuke berated himself for being even slightly annoyed about it. So what, if you have to make a couple of extra stops along the way, he told himself, just appreciate that someone you care about is even here for you to worry about. But to be honest, Sasuke couldn't be happy that she was here. Sakura had won their argument and now Sasuke was marching her straight to the hidden sand village, as if she was just as disposable as he was. No, he'd find a way where he didn't have to involve her in this. Maybe she would be distracted enough with her own mission that Sasuke could pursue the danger without directly involving her in the mess. It was the worry for her safety that was drowning his usual, indifferent composure. After the faint 2 beats of Sakura's breathing confirmed she had finally drifted to sleep, Sasuke allowed his gaze to slide over to her sleeping form. Her hair was tangled between her head and the khaki pack she was propped against. Her knees were bent, and her left arm was thrown over her eyes. The fingers of her right hand were splayed out against the grass in such a way that had Sasuke glancing down at his dangling sleeve, the very material that she had held onto with those fingers just hours earlier. He began to blink heavily, and then, he was suddenly seeing those very same fingers reaching out for him, bloodied and broken at excruciating angles. Her desperate screaming reached him in the vision and Sasuke was staring at her struggling body as a monster leaned over her broken body, a fist around her throat. First, it was Itachi that held her throat and Sasuke was a child again, begging him to spare her life. Then the figure morphed and it was Gaara, the sand demon, who stood over Sakura and covered her face with his sand. Sasuke was clawing at a wall of sand that separated him from her and he was whispering Naruto's name, pleading for him to save her. The monster shifted again, and the form it took next, had Sasuke kneeling and trembling at the pale face of Kaguya. Sasuke couldn't shut out the noise of Sakura wailing his name. Sasuke, that voice was calling out to him, and when he opened his eyes, Sakura was crouching in front of him, a shadow against the yellow morning light. Wake up. He stared at Sakura, who was clearly unharmed and currently smiling at him. So much for waking me up. The sun's up. A dream. It had been a nightmare and Sasuke shook his head to release himself from the trembling that still possessed him. He cursed under his breath, chastising himself for being so careless as to fall asleep. He must have been more tired than he originally thought. Sasuke felt a sudden guilt for dozing off. What if someone had attacked them? What if he had woken up and she hadn't been there? What would he have done, then? Shrugging her pack onto her shoulder, Sakura stood and surveyed a path before her. What do you think about heading southeast and making a stop for supplies in the Hidden Valley village? We could reach it by sundown tomorrow if we're diligent. Sasuke stood and frowned at her retreating form. She took a few steps before turning to check to see if he was following. Are you all right, Sasuke? She asked, concerned about edging her soft voice as her rose-colored brows furrowed. She tilted her head when he didn't respond. Sasuke wanted to tell her right then and there that he had changed his mind. He wasn't all right because he was regretting the decision to let her come. He shouldn't have let her step a foot out of that village. Going home, he wanted to say rudely. Go home, where you'll be safe. The words wouldn't form, so he stalked towards her, and then past her without even offering to take her pack this time. He let silence consume him as the visions of his nightmare haunted him. Sakura was disappointed in how downhill the situation was going between them. She didn't even realize she had formed expectations of traveling with Sasuke until he was walking silently in front of her for an hour, not even attempting to speak to her. What had she expected? Honestly, Sakura had fantasized about this very scenario for 2 years and had imagined them growing closer during their time together. But here was Sasuke, typically moody and unwavering in his mindset of speechless companionship. Had she done something wrong? Maybe she had talked too much yesterday. She gave Sasuke his silence for another hour before she couldn't take it anymore. She smiled and skipped forward until she was level with him as he walked. I think there's a river coming up. I can cook you some fish, if you're hungry. How are you familiar with this area? He asked immediately, masked in his voice. Sakura couldn't miss how he was making a point to not look at her. Not expecting that reply, Sakura responded timidly, well, actually, it's a long story. When Sasuke continued to walk without questioning her further, Sakura decided she'd just tell him. But, we had a mission here. There's an old Akatsuki hideout nearby. Team Guy and Team 7 discovered it when we pursued them after the Casecage's kidnapping. Sasuke looked at her then, dark eyebrows up, clearly not expecting her familiarity of the landscape to have such a history. A hideout? Where? Well, it's rubble now, she offered, updating him on the story. It got destroyed during our fight with Sasori. A small, unexpected snort came from the Uchiha and he closed his eyes as a smile touched his lips. That explains how he died, then. He went up against the Kyuubi. Actually, Sakura smiled, happy to reveal her secret to him. That was sort of my fault, the destruction. Sasuke's eyes snapped open again and he faced her fully this time. You fought Sasori? He asked it as if he didn't expect her to be able to make much headway in such a battle. She crossed her arms, not sure whether she should be offended. Don't act so surprised. I kicked your butt the other day. Where was Naruto? He asked, disregarding her statement entirely. He didn't stop walking and was failing to feign disinterest in her story, pretending to be completely unimpressed. After they extracted the Shukaku, Deidara took Gaara's body from the cavern in an attempt to lure Naruto out on his own, she told him. You know how Naruto is. He took off after him. If it weren't for Kakashi pursuing him, he would have met the same fate as the Casecage. Sasuke frowned at this information as he processed it. Sakura opened her mouth to continue when Sasuke asked, They left you? She grinned at the question. She had to be careful, because for a second there, she mistook his question for concern for her. I wasn't alone. I had Lady Chiyo with me. We faced Sasori together. If it weren't for her, I'd be dead. He watched her from the corner of his vision as they walked. What happened? Sakura winced at the memory of the blade that erupted from her middle. On reflection, Sakura reached up and brushed her fingers against the scar that marked the spot to the right of her left ribs. The poison had been the worst of it, that feeling of her burning veins as the toxic substance blackened her vision and tried to pull her under. If Lady Chio hadn't used the last antidote on her, she wouldn't be here now, telling the tale. She would be forever grateful to the honored puppeteer for fighting alongside her and giving her and Gara back their futures. I took a hit, she replied after a thoughtful minute. Lady Chio saved me. Sasuke took it out on the fish. He targeted them as they flipped above the water, and the kunai he sent through them pinned them fiercely against the tree he was using as a backdrop. They probably couldn't eat more than a few fish apiece, but Sasuke killed 9, just because he felt like it. Sakura's revelation to him earlier had only ignited an anger inside of Sasuke. To think of those bastard Akatsuki members hurting his teammates, had Sasuke sinking back into a pensive disposition. Sakura had almost died, along with the cage. Why was this the first time he was hearing about this? Because you don't care. The old Sasuke's hateful voice resounded in his head. It had been true. It was why he hadn't been there to protect them, to protect her. Sasuke tried to tell himself that if Kakashi had stayed with her instead of following Naruto, it wouldn't have happened and that it was their fault. But the longer Sasuke kept thinking about it, he turned the blame on himself. If Sasuke had been there, he could have followed Naruto instead, or stayed with Sakura. Whoever this Lady Chio was, he was grateful to her for saving the life of his comrade. The guilty part of himself reminded him that he, himself, had also tried to kill Sakura at one point in time. Sasuke, Sakura called out to him, kindly. I think that's enough fish, don't you? Want to help me with the fire? Sasuke jerked the fish from the kunai and cleared his simmering aura before walking back over to where Sakura sat next to a pile of branches she had constructed into a campfire. Inhaling, he formed the sign and ignited it with a fireball. He handed her the 9 fish, sat and leaned back against a log to watch as she skinned them carefully and speared each one, placing it over the fire to cook. The sun was setting, a bright orange ball on the horizon that was reflecting off the river in a bright orange stripe. Fish continued to dive out of the water for the small fireflies that hovered just above the surface. The sight soothed him slightly, as nature always did. He sighed, trying to mentally come up with an excuse to not say what he was about to. After a second, Sakura looked over at him and he knew she was seeing right through his guarded behavior to the smoldering emotions beneath his skin. He leaned forward, finding contentment in the sound of the fire and the smell of a cooking meal. He humbled himself at that moment and said, I'm sorry. Sakura looked at him through the fire, surprise apparent on her face despite the large flames. Her green eyes were a shocking contrast against the flickering red. For what? She asked softly, offering him one of those head-tilted smiles of hers. For not being there, he mumbled, looking down at the dirt beneath his crossed legs. You guys needed me, and I wasn't there. Sasuke, she grinned again, and stood. She removed a fully cooked fish from the fire and handed it to him before taking a seat next to him. We didn't need you. We wanted you there, and we need to know that you are our friend, but we handled it. Sasuke frowned at her with a sore expression. That kind of stung a little. Sakura nudged his side, laughing. Stop blaming yourself for things that you had no control over. You almost died, he reminded her bluntly. Maybe if I had. That's the risk of being a shinobi. I wouldn't be one if I wasn't willing to lay down my life for my village. She said it with a voice that reminded the Uchiha of himself, an unwavering conviction that couldn't be argued with. Maybe, if I had gone into work, Sakura added suddenly, looking down at her hands guiltily, that child from my clinic wouldn't have committed suicide. At that, Sasuke focused hard on the flares of the fire, the roasted fish still held untouched in his right hand. But that kind of thinking will consume us, Sasuke. We can't think like that. Sakura glanced up at him with a sober gentleness that made his heart beat. Remember what we talked about in the alley, not too long ago. Sasuke nodded, recalling their conversation. He had walked her home after she treated the new citizens that Sasuke had released from the Colosseum. He had been directly responsible for injuries as the result of battling them in order to win their freedom. During his conversation with her, he had told Sakura not to think the best of him. She had responded with, "Let's forget the past." She had asked him if they could work on being better shinobi together. "We just have to learn from our mistakes, try to be the best person and shinobi we can be in the present, and stop blaming ourselves for the past." She leaned forward and grabbed a fish of her own, before leaning back and taking a bite out of it. After she swallowed, she grinned at him again, "And have a little more faith in me, would you? I'm not the girl who needs to be protected anymore. I can take care of myself." Sasuke had indeed underestimated her if she had been able to take down Sasori. He knew that Sakura was strong and Sasuke was growing in his admiration for her more and more every day. He did have faith in her abilities, he had witnessed them himself. But that didn't mean he wouldn't worry. It didn't mean that he was going to just let her charge into a battle by herself. And that certainly didn't mean he wasn't going to spend every damn day for the rest of his life making sure no one ever hurt her like that again. Sakura started to doze heavily beside him, belly full of cooked fish, and a content smile hanging on her face like the crescent in the sky above them. The fire had started fading a while ago, but with Sakura so close beside him, he didn't want to jostle her by moving to get more firewood. When she began to drift into sleep moments earlier, the crackle of the fire filling the silence between them, her head had begun to nod ever so slightly in his direction. It was already difficult enough for him to be sitting right next to her, but when her ear suddenly came to a rest on his right arm, Sasuke froze instantly. Half of him wanted to instantly slip away, but Sasuke found that there was another part that wanted to stay. Just a few more seconds, he thought to himself as Sakura curled up against his side. How was she even able to be so close to him without the same hysteria that was currently squeezing the life out of the Uchiha? It's not that Sasuke hadn't let others touch him before. Karen, for example, was over him all the time, but Sasuke hadn't ever felt like this. Hell, even Sakura as his teammate for all those years had held him, jumped on him, supported him, and held his hand. Why was this so different from all those other times? Peering down at her face, Sasuke asked himself, what's so wrong about this? But then, he remembered why. He recalled those hateful words he spat at Kakashi during the war, right after he had used genjutsu on Sakura to prevent her from following Naruto and himself. I have no reason to love her, or to be loved by her. Even though Sasuke had been denying what was between them, even though he had been clinging desperately to his selfish goal, Sasuke had meant what he said. Especially the part about Sakura having absolutely no reason to love him. At that time, there was no reason for either of them to love one another. Sasuke was consumed in darkness and had thought he would never reciprocate her feelings. Never. How different it was now, when he stared down at her and felt something for her again. But, Sasuke just couldn't let this happen between them. Any of it. He wasn't an idiot. They were alone together on a journey, and even though they were both shinobi focused on a goal, they were still human. If he selfishly allowed this moment, and every other moment that might happen between them play out, he would be betraying his own redemption. He had thought about this before. What would happen to Sakura after all this when he told her he couldn't come home? He would thoroughly devastate her. He would be the worst of all men at that point, and if it were anyone else, Sasuke would probably have killed the bastard for doing it to her. I'm sorry, he thought silently before reaching up and supporting her head as he placed her pack under it to support her in his absence. He did it so smoothly that her deep breathing never hitched, and the pink-haired ninja continued to sleep soundly. Sasuke backed away from her and took up a spot across the dying fire, using it as a mental and physical barrier between them. He watched her silent sleep for a few more minutes before his own eyes grew heavy. He knew that if he fell asleep now, they should be safe. Sasuke had slept silently out in the woods for 2 years. They would be able to rely on their ninja instincts if anything happened. Or so Sasuke thought, as he finally let sleep take him. When early morning birdsong woke him with the sunrise, Sasuke blinked hard only to find that Sakura was not where he had left her. He sat up straighter, looking around quickly. Where the hell did she go? Her pack was in the same spot, but it was open and supplies were bulging out of it. Sasuke walked over to it and frowned because she wasn't there beside it. No need to overreact, he told himself as he surveyed the land before him, the river twining endlessly through the forest landscape beyond. Sasuke decided to remind himself right then and there, that Sakura could take care of herself. As he followed the river down the forest, in a near frenzy, he recalled all the times that she had done so. Against Sasori, the puppet master, in the Fourth Shinobi World War, a Sannin's pupil like himself, against Kido, when Sasuke had showed up to rescue her and discovered that she had already taken care of everything. She was fine, he told himself, as he stalked through the trees, Sharingan activated and purple chakra emanating off of him in waves. Sakura pulled a clean shirt over her wet skin, the fabric clinging to her sides and arms. She slipped on a fresh pair of shorts, thinner black ones that she had packed because they would be more suited for traveling in the heat. Taking her time, enjoying the sun that kissed the river as it colored the sky the same shade of her hair, Sakura reattached her ninja weapons to her legs and side. As she did so, she smiled, remembering her conversation with Sasuke the night before. She still couldn't believe it, that she was with him, finally walking by his side after so long. When she woke up this morning, the sun was still not up. Sakura had stood and smiled when she located Sasuke's sleeping form across the charred remains of their fire. He had that same expressionless face, even in sleep, and Sakura had resisted the urge to laugh to herself about it. She always thought that he had to work so hard to keep it that way all the time, but even when he was unconscious, the mask was unwavering. Sakura took advantage of his sleep by grabbing a few things from her pack and tiptoeing away from the campsite. Now was the only time where she would be able to wash without having to make Sasuke wait on her. She knew that she could just hold out for the village that they'd reach tonight, but to be honest, she felt rather disgusted having gone 2 days now without a bath. And so, she walked half a mile down the river bank until she felt private enough to strip and slide into the freezing water. Now, staring at the sunrise, she was giddy to get back, not wanting to miss getting to wake Sasuke up again. But when she started to climb her way back up the bank, she stopped suddenly when she saw Sasuke stomping towards her, a red and purple glare meeting hers. He stopped just above her, seething, and said nothing. "What's wrong?" she asked suddenly, wary as she yanked a kunai from her weapon's pouch, angling her head around to detect an enemy. Why else would he activate the Sharingan? "You," he spat, before turning and stalking back in the direction he came from. "Me?" she asked in astonishment, before hiking up the remainder of the bank to catch up to him. "What did I do? Don't just run off like that," he hissed between his teeth as he looked at her over his shoulder. All she could see was the purple of his Rinnegan. Sakura balked at his anger but continued to follow him. Was he angry because he woke up and she wasn't there? "Sorry," she offered when he slowed his pace a little. "Didn't mean to upset you. I was just taking a bath." He continued to walk ahead of her, purposefully not making eye contact with her. "We're in enemy territory now. Don't be naive and take off on your own like that." Sakura suddenly wanted to punch him, just to remind him who she was talking to. "Sasuke, I'm Jonin, remember? And this isn't enemy territory anymore." After a long sigh, Sasuke just said, "I know. Just do me a favor and let me know before you run off. It's been a long time since I've had to keep up with you." She poked him hard in the side then, an action that had the Uchiha looking her up and down in disbelief, like he couldn't believe she just did that. Are you admitting to me that you were worried about me? Sakura asked with a smirk. He frowned and blinked at her in irritation. No, he breathed. I'm worried about having to tell Kakashi and Naruto you were killed by some ninja while I looked the other way. He turned and began walking away. Sakura crossed her arms at that comment and stuck out her tongue. Maybe, I'll be the one to tell them what happened to you. He scoffed, loudly, and said nothing else as they made their way back towards camp. Sunset couldn't come fast enough. They had made only 2 stops since this morning during their momentous traveling, and each time, Sakura announced loudly to him, "You going to be okay if I leave you for a minute? I'll scream if I need you. And, Sasuke, just so you know, I'm okay." Each time, she returned to his side with that innocent smile of hers and giggled, arms crossed behind her back as she leaned slightly forward. Damn, annoying woman. As if he wasn't already ashamed of his outburst this morning, it seemed that Sakura was going to take advantage of it every second, not just because it obviously wounded her pride, but because she was relishing in the fact that he had been worried about her. Sasuke really did feel ridiculous. Of course, Sakura had gone off on her own to bathe or whatever else. He knew how absurd his reaction was the moment he saw her standing on the bank, hair still wet and clothes draping over shoulders and clinging to her curves. If Sasuke hadn't been so pissed off, he would have tried to duck into the trees before she noticed him. Sasuke told himself that his excuse was that he had been on his own for a long time now. He had forgotten what it was like to wake up in the middle of the night and ignore the fact that one of your teammates had slipped off into the woods. It was normal stuff like that Sasuke had never made an issue about. Until this morning, that is. When Sakura walked ahead of him, arms still tucked with fingers connected behind her, he slowly dragged his fingers down his face in annoyance with his entire situation. He decided he would let her lead for a little while. When they finally arrived at Tanagakure, Sasuke frowned at the gravel path that slithered down the hillside toward the village built in the deepest part of the valley. The valley walls rose up jaggedly to either side of the town, a bony ribcage surrounding the heart. Now that the sun was setting quickly, the village was lit by the soft twinkling lights of the night vendors. Sasuke didn't necessarily care for this place. Not only did Sasuke not appreciate the fact that Tanagakure remained a neutral party during the Fourth Shinobi World War, but the history of its development was a tangled web of crime and corruption. Sasuke didn't know much of the details, but apparently the previous leader rose to power through deception and bribery. Sasuke had even heard a rumor a few years back that he had executed many of his own citizens for speaking out against him. Now, however, the current village head, a man named Magyuku, was the reason the village had turned itself around. Not only was the village now nicknamed the Land of Peace, thanks to its current savior, but was now a competing source of agriculture among the lands. Sasuke supposed that Magyuku had made the decision not to join the allied shinobi forces, because he wanted peace for his people. The thought still didn't take the bad taste out of his mouth. Sasuke didn't care if they were in a time of peace now, he would distrust and dislike them for their decision to look the other way during the war. They entered the gates easily, and Sakura smiled kindly at the guards, announcing who they were. What he meant by that was that Sakura mentioned that they were Leaf Shinobi and Sasuke relayed that they were just passing through. They received clearance immediately when Sakura mentioned the 6th Hokage, and then revealed that she was a friend of Naruto Uzumaki. It seemed his friend's popularity had even reached this small village. Neither Sasuke nor Sakura mentioned who Sasuke was. It seemed it was an unspoken realization between them that mentioning Sasuke Uchiha's name might have a negative reaction. It wounded his Uchiha pride, but Sasuke put a halt to that risky line of thinking. Entering side by side, Sasuke and Sakura began walking quietly toward the center of town. Sasuke couldn't help but marvel at the blue-black river that reflected the house lights that glowed on either side of it. While the houses were perched on dirt platforms, Cattle grazed on the grassy river bank just below. It was really quite beautiful. I'm going down to the medical center, if that's all right, Sakura announced suddenly, turning to face him as soon as they entered. She flashed him a kind, apologetic smile. What? Sasuke asked, stupefied at her sudden desire to run off on her own again. She began backing away from him and Sasuke stopped and crossed his arms at her explanation. This village is one of the world's superpowers in medicine. They have some rare herbs that grow here. I'd like to see it in practice. And the real reason why she wanted to go through here comes out. Sasuke supposed this was a part of her specific mission, to gather medical intelligence for the leaf. Why don't you find us a place to stay for the night, and I'll meet you when I'm done, she shouted back at him over her shoulder. Sasuke made to follow her and demand that she stay put, but stopped walking when he registered her command, looking blankly after her. What did she just say? Stay. Sasuke had told the truth back there and had meant it literally. They were passing through, not staying the night. Sasuke cursed externally and internally. Damn annoying woman. ... It was late already when Sakura had been received by the village hospital. A kind man named Fumio was actually the head medical ninja here and received Sakura with much enthusiasm. She talked to him for an hour just about the herbs that grew along the rivers that ran through the valley. It was a purple flower called the grink flower, and it was mixed with a spice to help people with permanent disabilities to manage pain. Sakura was completely enthralled as she watched Fumio prepare the mixture. She took thorough notes and in exchange, gave the man some of her own creation. The pink-haired medic ninja even wrote down the ingredients and instructions for how to make and utilize the burn salve in his hospital. Walking away with her fists full of the grink pain prescriptions, Sakura hurried down the street to the only inn that Tanagakure had to offer. Despite it being the only one, it was large and had at least 3 stories. Eager to tell Sasuke about all that had happened, Sakura made her way to the front desk. Hello, the kind, elderly woman at the front desk called out to her as she entered. How can I help you? She eyed Sakura's full hands curiously. Actually, Sakura began, unsure of what to call Sasuke. They most certainly were not together. They had once been friends, then enemies. They were friends again now, weren't they? She could call him that. I think that my friend. Oh, the woman blushed, waving a hand at Sakura with a half grin stretching across her face as she laid her opposite palm against her cheek. That handsome young man, with the spiky black hair. Yes, he came in a while ago. What a beautiful face that boy has. Sakura couldn't resist the twitch that tugged at her strained smile at this woman. Yeah, did he happen to? Cut off once again, the dark-haired elderly woman looked down at a sheet. Sakura, right, your friend said an annoying, pink-haired woman by that name would be arriving. That must be you, dear. Sakura laughed awkwardly and rubbed the back of her head in embarrassment. On the inside, Sakura was screaming. Who does Uchiha think he is, describing me in that way? This was his way of repaying her for running off, she figured. Well, annoying might not be the exact word I would have used, Sakura replied with a nervous laugh. Do you know which room he is in? He's in the room next to yours, dear. The lady said, handing Sakura a room key. As Sakura made her way up the 3rd stairway, she couldn't figure out why she was surprised that Sasuke had gotten a separate room from her. And then she was even more embarrassed for assuming they would share one. She sighed heavily into her splayed fingers. Of course, they wouldn't. It was ridiculous to even think about it. It wasn't like Team 7 had ever shared one before. Kakashi had always made sure Sakura got a room to herself, while the 3 boys camped out together in one to save on expenses. Why would Sasuke do anything different? Foolish, annoying Sakura. When she walked past his door, she stopped and stared at it for a minute before going on to her own. It was late, she told herself. Sasuke probably was already asleep. Sakura was suddenly feeling insecure about leaving him on his own while she went off to the hospital. She didn't want to annoy him any more than she already had, so she closed her door tightly behind her. Sasuke jerked his head up from the map he was labeling when he heard the door down the hall open and shut. It was 11 o'clock at night, and Sakura was just going straight to bed. After he had waited up all this time, to make sure she made it back safely, she had decided to just retire without saying a word to him. Sasuke thought to himself. He half expected her to come knocking on his door with the excuse of wishing him good night. Why do you care? That condescending voice resounded from inside of him. I don't, he replied, straightening the map out on the table with his hands. He ignored his mild irritation and continued to mark the path that they had traveled from Konoha. He charted how much ground they had left before reaching Sunagakure. It wasn't like Sasuke needed to do this. The Uchiha knew exactly how long it would take them to get there, he had traveled there before. The fact of the matter was, Sasuke had to find something to do in order to refocus on the pressing issue of the Otsutsuki race. Even though Sasuke's primary aim was to locate all of the dimensions, he also wanted to discover all of Kagaya's connections. Sasuke wanted to find the cracks in the space-time dimensions without having to rely on the Rinnegan. He also wanted to know the answers to these questions. Where would an enemy most likely infiltrate? Where could they all relocate in the case of an attack? Who would continue to be their allies if something so terrible as Kagaya showed up on their planet? He wanted to find out anything and everything about the Otsutsuki race that might give them even a small advantage. After marking out the areas he had traveled to in the last 2 years, Sasuke circled specific locations that still held Sasuke's interest for various reasons. Sunagakure was first on his list because the Kazekage was the Leaf's #1 ally. Konoha had had difficulties with the village in the past, especially with Orochimaru's plot to destroy the village. However, Orochimaru had manipulated the Sand Shinobi by killing the Kazekage and using his body during the Chunin exams, so they were just following orders. Ever since that time, Sasuke would say that Konoha and Sunagakure had worked well with one another, especially now that Gaara was the Kazekage. Sasuke was suddenly remembering the talk that Gaara had with him back during the Kage Summit. It's not too late for you. Don't fall into a world possessed by hatred. You won't be able to return. So, if I come back, what is there for me? Sasuke, you and I are alike. We have walked through the darkness of this world. That is why we are able to see even a sliver of light. Both back then, and even now. Even though he had been cold and told Gaara he had closed his eyes long ago, Gaara had been right. Naruto had shown him that sliver of light. He had found it and had somehow crawled through it out of the darkness. Barely. Just barely had he been able to return. Gaara was right. Sasuke honestly hoped he would receive a welcome from the Kazekage despite having ended on bad terms with him. Sasuke caught himself listening closely to the sound of running water coming through the wall. She had to be showering, which settled Sasuke's anxiety. It seemed she was okay, then. He didn't understand why he was suddenly trying to come up with an excuse to walk down the hall and knock on her door. That wouldn't be like him at all. Sasuke didn't necessarily want to have separate rooms, simply because it was a pain to make the effort to communicate with her, but he didn't dare tell the lady downstairs they would be sharing one. Not only was it indecent, but Sasuke knew Sakura needed space. Hell, he needed space from her. He was already having a hard time concentrating on his mission. He couldn't imagine the distraction she'd be in the same hotel room. And then, Sasuke heard a set of footsteps coming down the hall towards him. The knock that followed wasn't on his door, but on Sakura's. Sasuke stood from the tiny writing desk and stalked across the room and stared down at his doorknob, contemplating whether or not he should open it to see who it was. Another knock on her door had Sasuke swinging it open. When Sasuke looked one door down, his icy glare sharpened at the dark-headed man who stood in front of it. Sasuke recognized the tool strapped to his hip that identified him as a ninja. The stranger was leaning back away from Sakura's shut door to look further down the hallway to the right. "Can I help you?" Sasuke asked icily, resting his side against the frame to communicate that he was content to stand there. "Oh," the man said, whipping his head back around to assess Sasuke's figure. The ninja raised a hand in greeting and flashed the Uchiha a grin. "A friend of mine is expecting me. I think she locked me out." Sasuke took a step out of his room and fingered his kunai pouch with his right fingers. "I think you have the wrong room," he responded coldly. He certainly didn't recognize this man. He was tall, dark-headed and wore a single glove on his left hand. Whoever this guy was, Sasuke would be damned if he just let him stand there knocking on Sakura's door all night. Surely, she hadn't invited a friend to her room in the past few hours. The Sakura he knew would never do something like that. Either this man was lost, or he was lying. "Oh," the man said again, squinting at the faint room number on the green door. He turned back to Sasuke with an embarrassed smile. "You're right. My mistake, I'm a digit off. A friend of yours staying here. That's really none of your business." Sasuke spat at him, completely disinterested in making small talk to a man who was currently a threat. "Now get lost." The man raised his hands in apology. "All right," the ninja said before turning and retreating the way he'd come. Sasuke's gaze followed him until he no longer heard the sound of his shoes going down the 3 flights of stairs. He listened closely to the old clerk's voice as she said goodbye to the man. Sasuke grit his teeth at the fact that the ninja didn't stop at another room. Whether the man simply stood up or had followed Sakura, he didn't care. Whenever a disheveled shower Sakura opened the door a second later to see who was there, Sasuke immediately turned back toward his room. "Was that you who knocked?" Sakura asked, following him and looking in through the doorway, unease apparent on her face. She was fisting a white towel around clumps of her hair. "What is it? Is there something wrong?" Sasuke grabbed the map off the table and gathered the rest of his things. Sakura gawked at him when he shoved past her and marched into her room. The Uchiha held open the door for her and said nothing when she came back in, and Sasuke locked the door behind them. He tossed his things onto the floor and threw a pillow next to them. Decency and distraction be damned. "Sasuke, what happened?" Sakura asked, reaching out worriedly and taking his fingers. He jerked them away immediately and snarled at her, his temper and shame getting the better of him. She frowned at him and Sasuke turned his face to hide his flush from her. Now was not the time to allow any physical contact between them even slightly. He took up a spot on the floor and turned his back to her. "It's nothing," he said without a trace of emotion in his voice. "It doesn't make sense to waste money on 2 rooms. Now go to sleep." Sasuke was embarrassed with himself for the behavior that he was continuing to display out of his concern for her. First this morning, and again, now. She was driving him mad just by being on this mission with him, and Sasuke was suddenly wondering how often things like this happened when she was on her own. He hated this whole situation and wished the uncaring Sasuke could take over for just a little bit. If that bastard would have just minded his own business, they would be sleeping peacefully in separate rooms right now. Sasuke scowled when he felt Sakura sit next to him on the floor. She stopped drying her hair and said quietly, "I had a feeling someone was following me after I left the hospital earlier." Sasuke sat up on his elbows, his right shoulder in alignment with hers. They were facing opposite walls. "Why didn't you say something?" he asked incredulously. She should have told him that. He could have prepared himself more. He wouldn't have let that man walk away. Sasuke might have even killed him. And with that thought, Sasuke understood why she didn't say anything. "I could have handled it," she said, raising her chin to look him in the face. Sasuke's gaze suddenly softened at her fierceness. "Stubborn, infuriating woman, who was trying to leave him out of things. Sasuke couldn't help but take her all in. The way she looked in something that wasn't red and white made him blink twice at the nightclothes. And that darker shade of pink her hair took on when it was wet had him quickly looking away. He chastised himself immediately. This was the beginning to his end. Even if Sakura could have taken care of that man on her own, it was worth all of this mess just to make sure that man never set eyes on her like this. Sasuke clenched his fists. If there's a ninja following you, it could mean that we are being watched because we are outsiders. But if he's trying to enter your room, I just know that it's not good. Sasuke wanted to track this man down just to have the answers. Even if it was a time of peace, Sasuke shouldn't have let that man just walk away. Sakura smiled, which irritated Sasuke because he didn't understand how she could be so relaxed about all this. She replied, I planned on figuring that out if he came here. You just beat me to it. Because taking a shower at that exact moment, especially when you think someone is following you, is a smart way to figure things out. He contained that comment but sighed irritably in response. And besides, she continued, he might have just been curious to know who I was. Or, he probably mistook me for someone else. With that pink hair, Sasuke doubted it, and someone who was curious didn't follow you to your lodgings and knock on your door. The ninja would have approached her in the street if that were the case. It was probably more like that the man knew who they were or knew Sakura's value to Konoha, specifically to Kakashi, the Leaf's Hokage, to Naruto, the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi, or to Sasuke, the last of the Uchiha. Sasuke reminded himself how Kido had captured Sakura in an effort to lure Sasuke back to the village. Who knew what someone's intentions toward her might be, and Sasuke just didn't want to risk finding them out. I'll stay here tonight, just in case he comes back, Sasuke said resolutely, laying back down and turning his back to Sakura. It's probably better that we stay together for as long as we are in enemy territory. I agree, Sakura said with a teasing, smiling voice. I wouldn't want you to be in danger. I can protect you better if we are in the same room. Sasuke scoffed into his pillow. Twice. He said nothing else for the rest of the night. Did nothing else but lay on the ground pretending to sleep for hours. Sasuke was dodging puppets, weaving in and out between their closely assembled bodies. They were spinning swords and launching poisoned shuriken in his direction, and he was fighting them off desperately, trying to get to her. Sakura! He screamed, running towards the red-headed puppet master who was holding her up on the end of his blade. Spewing blood, she stared at Sasori's face with wide eyes, and asked, why? Stop. He tried to scream, but it wasn't his voice that echoed across the cavern. Kakashi. Kakashi was the one who was running now, but towards Sasuke, screaming at him in order to prevent the Uchiha from doing what he was about to do. Sasuke, stop. Sasuke turned back to locate Sakura again, but instead, he found her throat between his fingers. Why? She choked again, the crimson blood from her lips spilling out onto his wrist. He realized that it wasn't Sasori who was killing her, but himself. A poisoned dagger, the one he had snatched from her, was thrust through her stomach. At the sight, a terrible laugh bellowed up from his very own chest. Kill her, a voice said inside his head. Sever the bond. Sasuke was pulled from the nightmare like a dead man resuscitated back to life. Sakura was leaning over him on the floor, shaking him. What is it? He sighed irritably, and then hushed immediately when he realized that she had a panicked look on her face. Her gaze focused on the wall across from them, and it took Sasuke a hazy second to register the muffled voices that were coming through the wall of Sasuke's old hotel room. The voices were faint, a whisper that only a ninja would have been able to detect. It was a harsh, frustrated hiss of an individual and the barely audible squeaking hinge of the door next to theirs that made Sasuke understand their current situation. Someone is, she began. Alarm bolted through every nerve in Sasuke's body. and he shot up and covered Sakura's mouth with his right hand before she could say more. She gaped at him with fearful eyes as the door knob to their room began to twist slowly. Someone had just been in Sasuke's rented room and now stood just outside. Was it that bastard with the black glove that he had met earlier in the hall? So, if they had gone to his room first, then Sasuke had been the target. Not Sakura herself. Within seconds, the door was compromised with a splintering crack and two masked men charged into the room. It was hard to see them in the pitch dark, but with his active Sharingan, Sasuke could faintly make out ninja headbands with an unrecognizable symbol. And then, Sasuke cursed himself for not having acted sooner, because the enemy acted first, and ninja weapons were sent swiftly towards their kneeling forms. Shit. Sakura immediately angled her body to dodge, but Sasuke released her mouth and held her close to prevent her from moving. The Uchiha closed his right eye and focused his chakra to his Rinnegan. Immediately, a spiraling, purple portal opened up behind Sakura and the Uchiha ducked his shoulder and dove forward, clutching the startled pink-haired ninja as the two of them tipped over into the vortex. As they plummeted, Sasuke twisted their bodies around so that he was able to watch the black tear in the space seal back shut just before the ninja could follow them through. A couple of shuriken, however, did make it through, and Sasuke clasped his female companion close to him, barely able to angle them so that the weapons flew past them on either side. He had to act quickly. They were falling. Sasuke. Sakura screamed into his shoulder, terrified as the red ground was rising up to meet them. The portal had appeared at the same height in this dimension that their room had been at the top level of the hotel building. Which meant that the two of them had several stories of air between them and the ground. A space that would be crossed within a matter of a few seconds. As the thick air of the new climate rushed around their bodies, Sasuke spun again so that Sakura's back was to the ground and he hovered a few inches above her. "What are you?" she screamed, as Sasuke released her with his only arm and used his hand to reach into his weapons pouch. He launched a single kunai past her toward the burgundy dunes beneath them. The metal blade stuck in a soft spot of sand below and Sasuke once again narrowed his Rinnegan eye. Closing the space between them once more, he grabbed onto Sakura's waist and the falling pair flickered in the green sky and disappeared. Sasuke was suddenly on his feet, having used his teleportation ability to trade places with the kunai. However, now the kunai was racing in the sky towards them. Still holding Sakura, Sasuke dropped in order to dodge the falling blade, and together, they skidded down the hard sand of the dune's side. They came to a stop several feet away and below from the kunai's intended target, inches from where they stood a second ago. It was a risky gamble, but the fact that the two of them were unharmed, and not splattered on the ground of this dimension, made Sasuke sigh in relief. He rested on his back and let his head fall back against the ground with a thump. "This is all your fault." "My fault?" Sakura asked incredulously, rolling out of his open arms, and sitting up to look down at him. "How is this my fault?" Sasuke stood and swiped at the copper dust that clung to his cloak. Looking down at her, he accused, "Because if you hadn't run off yesterday, and announced yourself to every citizen you met, then no one would have followed you to our hotel." "Excuse me," Sakura growled up at him, which Sasuke returned with a hard, fixed glare. "I did no such thing." She rose to her feet and came to stand next to him. "If you weren't so hard to wake, we could have evaded this entire situation." Sasuke grit his teeth at the statement and bitterly retorted, "I wanted to pass through the village. You insisted that we stayed the night." Sakura frowned, then just said, "We could have handled them." Sasuke feigned indifference and arrogantly mocked, "HN." She glowered but he didn't give her a chance to respond, he walked off. Sasuke surveyed the land around them. It had been a while since he had had enough chakra to reach the core dimension that served as the central connection between all the other dimensions. Why had he brought them here instead of handling the situation back in that hotel room? Now that he was thinking about it, It would have made much more sense to teleport with the man closest to the door and then surprise the other from behind with a killing blow. He felt like a coward, having ducked into this realm and avoided the entire confrontation altogether. Sakura was right. Coming here was his fault. He had tried to blame her and reason with himself that it was just instinct that had caused him to do this. He had been scared, which resulted in his knee-jerk reaction to get them as far away as possible. But why? Sasuke blamed that horrible dream he had just had which kept him from reacting to the threat sooner. The whole thing had thrown him off his game. No, she was throwing him off. If she weren't here with him, he wouldn't be having these dreams where he was concerned for her safety. And just now, Sasuke had been so desperate to remove her from the life-threatening situation that he had spent the last of his expendable chakra reserves to get her to the farthest place he could think of. Why didn't he just eliminate the ninja at that moment? Sasuke ran a hand down his face. Damn, were these nightmares all because of the bond that was growing stronger between them? The bond he had tried to sever that day when Sasuke had meant to kill her. These unwanted scenes that were merging with tale and memory were tormenting him. Watching other people repeatedly attack her and then seeing himself take her life, was all because of his damn guilt. Was he trying to protect her now, because he owed it to her? See, why was he even thinking like this? It's not like he cared back when they were fighting Madara and she impaled herself on his black receiver rod. Instead, Sasuke had taken advantage of the diversion, rushing past her to deliver Madara a blow. Naruto was the one to catch and aid the kunoichi after Madara had sent all three of them flying backwards. Hell, he even let Kakashi save Sakura from falling into the lava in Kagaya's volcano dimension. Sakura was following him closely, asking him questions he wasn't even listening or responding to. He marched ahead, looking at the green sky above him and the maroon mountainous terrain around them and beneath his stomping feet. To add to his list of corrupt choices, Sasuke recalled his thoughts during the last time that he and Sakura were here together. Yes, she and Obito had opened the portal between this space and the hot, desert dimension where Sasuke had been trapped. In all honesty, when he first saw his rescuers, his first gut reaction was to replace himself with one of them. What had kept him from that resolution was the fact that if he had separated the two, the portal might have collapsed before he could have even made the exchange. Fortunately, Sakura's vest had been laying there on the ground next to her and Sasuke didn't have to replace himself with one of the people who had saved him. But in his defense, Sasuke had chosen to look for an alternative, which was proof that he was changing for the better even in that second. Okay, maybe he couldn't have gone through with replacing himself with Sakura, but Obito had definitely been an option. Sasuke recalled the way in which he supported Sakura in her chakra-depleted state right after that. At the time, Sasuke was telling himself that it was only gratitude. A very small sense of gratitude that he had had for her for bringing him back. Nothing else. Recalling it now, Sasuke would be lying to himself if he said that it was only gratitude. There was always something between them, he supposed. Even during moments when he truly believed their bond was severed, when he treated her less than she deserved, when he was cruel, unresponsive to her feelings, and wanted to kill her. Hey, Sakura, who had been trying to talk to him this whole time, placed herself in front of his marching form. Are you even listening? What? He spat, his annoyance with her apparent on his face. She looked up at him with worry on her face. What's going on with you? What's wrong? You. He wanted to say. You are what's wrong. You and your damn stubborn resolution to be involved with me. I just used all of my chakra reserves to bring us here, the Uchiha grumbled instead. I'm annoyed about it. He pushed past her again, continuing his trek. No, he admitted to himself. Himself or rather, who he was Sasuke's problem. Sakura followed the stalking Uchiha as they made their way across the foreign landscape. Well, it wasn't entirely foreign. She had been here before during their battle with Kagaya, back when Obito had brought them here along with Naruto's clone, in order to bring Sasuke back to the battle in the ice dimension. Sakura didn't necessarily like this place. The air was neither hot nor cold, but it felt strange, like there was just enough air to inhale, but not enough to take more than short, limited breaths. The sun was currently dim through the green atmosphere, just enough light where they could see, but not enough that it could be considered bright. Everything about this place was completely on the edge. Sakura did not like it. Not to mention, that it also reminded her of their battle with Kagaya and the many lives lost in the war. This place also reminded Sakura that the threat of the Otsutsuki clan was still very real and not something that disappeared in the past along with Kagaya's defeat. This threat was what kept Sasuke from a happy life in the village. It did have one good memory though. When she thought of this place, Sakura couldn't help but remember the sensation of Sasuke supporting her against him when she had felt like she had failed him. The Uchiha had borne her weight as she recuperated her strength after having spent all of her chakra in order to save him. It was something a friend would have done, something the Sasuke she knew would have done. Despite the memory, Sakura still loathed this place. So why had Sasuke chosen to bring them here? She wanted to ask him, but his mood was foul, and he was currently stalking forward, not caring if she followed him or not. Where he was taking them, she had no idea. Sasuke had been exploring these dimensions for years now, so Sakura knew that he must have a final destination in mind. Sasuke had said he was annoyed about the amount of chakra it had taken him to teleport. Did this statement mean that they were trapped here? Despite his mood, Sakura jogged to catch up with him, a difficult feat considering the up and down momentum she was having to regulate on this uneven ground. Sasuke, she asked him, where are we going? He didn't answer, just trudged ahead with that unwavering focus. So, she did something she knew would get his attention. She reached out, and gingerly took hold of the fingers of his right hand. She expected him to stop or to freeze, but instead, he spun on her with a wrath she wasn't quite anticipating. Stop doing that. The kunoichi recoiled, embarrassed and frustrated. She immediately withdrew her hand back to her chest. Why won't you tell me what's going on? You're starting to act like Sasuke, I don't know. His eyes got wide at that comment and he immediately looked away from her. Sakura needed answers. She needed to know what their current situation was, some sort of affirmation that everything was going to be okay, that he wasn't mad at her because he blamed her for this. Did you know those people, Sasuke? She asked, quieting her voice and clutching her rejected hand to her chest. Why were they after us? The silence continued and there was no response. He must be truly upset with her about this. Look, I'm sorry I told the guards at the entrance we were Leaf Shinobi and associated with Naruto. I'm sorry I went to the medic center. I promise that I didn't tell anyone who you were. It's not your fault, he interrupted, which surprised Sakura. It always astonished her when he said things like this. They're after me. Due to my reputation, I'm not the most difficult person to recognize. You just happen to be with me, so you're being targeted. Sakura stared at him in open shock. Did he really believe that way? She took a step towards him, afraid that he would retreat into his shell of silence again if she didn't keep him talking. But why? Why are they after you? She asked. Because of who I am and what I've done, he said, rotating his back to her and walking again. This time, he slowed so she could keep up. I've pissed a lot of people off. Who knows why they're after me? Sakura strode quickly by his side. His hair fell into his eyes as he ducked his head. There was a long silence before he spoke again. This is why, Sakura. This is why I have to stay away from the village as much as possible right now. I have too many enemies. I'm here, though, she whispered to him, leaning in to elbow him. I can help you. I don't want, he began but held his tongue. He didn't have to finish for Sakura to know what he meant to say. I don't want you here. The words felt like a blow to her heart. She stopped in her tracks. Sakura didn't understand. She didn't understand why Sasuke didn't want her here, next to him. Was she wrong about all of this? There were times when Sakura believed Sasuke might actually love her back. Times like just a few short hours ago when a stranger knocked on her door, and the Uchiha had stormed into her room announcing that it was pointless to spend money on 2 rooms. Or how yesterday morning, when Sasuke came looking for her in the woods because he woke up to her missing. Maybe Sakura was misinterpreting it all. Maybe it was just concern for a friend that had him acting this way. Sometimes she wanted to just give up and let the stubborn Uchiha have his damn, lonely way. But it wasn't in her to give up because she just couldn't let him go. Couldn't remove him from her heart. And when he acted this way towards her, she couldn't bring herself to smother out the hope that bloomed in her chest. This undying love for him often felt like an undying curse. It's just that, the Uchiha began, and Sakura glanced up to see him standing still just a few feet in front of her. He peeked back at her guiltily for a second through his black curtain of bangs. If Sakura would have blinked, she would have missed it. She waited anxiously for him to continue. It's easier when I'm by myself, he continued, just because I only have to worry about myself. There it was again. That hope in her chest. That undying curse. What was Sasuke feeling when he said things like that? All anger evaporating from within her, Sakura closed the distance between them and poked him in the side, something she was finding quite enjoyable when he made that, "How dare you," expression. Are you sure it's not because I'm annoying? He scoffed and brushed her hand off of him. Their fingers touched for a long, lingering second. To Sakura, it wasn't long enough. Their eyes met too, but then Sasuke blinked and retracted his hand gradually as he purposefully avoided her gaze. Was that lasting touch supposed to be an apology for earlier, or was she reading too much into it? That's the main reason, he snorted loudly before walking off again. She glowered. Yep, she was reading too much into it. Sakura stuck her tongue out at him behind his back. She let out a quiet sigh and watched him walk away, content to hang back a few feet as they continued forward. Silently and to herself, Sakura cradled her burning fingertips. Sasuke trailed onward, an annoyed expression permanently glued to his face. If he let the mask slip even a little bit, his expression might give him away. After what had just passed between them, Sasuke didn't look back at his companion even once. Silently, and concealed by his cloak, Sasuke was running his thumb over his middle and ring fingers. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't rub away the tingling sensation. Sasuke stopped his long trek in Kagaya's core dimension. Finally, they reached the spot he was searching for. It was a small tower, a lookout that Sasuke had stumbled upon during his investigation of this realm a year ago. Being the link to all the other dimensions, Sasuke wasn't surprised that there was a base here. What he had been confused about was that the tower was shorter and built parallel to a mountain that rose above it, not really an ideal spot for a lookout. It was also the same color as the red mountain that it was assembled against, as if it were constructed to be concealed rather than used to spot enemies. Realizing this, Sasuke had assumed it was one of Kagaya's hideouts rather than a battle fort. This just strengthened his belief that Kagaya was afraid of something more powerful than herself. What is this place? Sakura asked beside him as they peered up at it. Sasuke made for the entrance, a discreet crack between the mountain wall and the tower's side fortification. It could only be seen from behind one of the large boulders flanking the cylinder framework. No one who didn't know it was there would be able to find it. I think it was one of Kagaya's holes she liked to crawl in when she wasn't causing terror back in our world. Oh, she gulped. Sasuke smirked and motioned for her to follow. It's safe, he reassured her. She stumbled after him. They had been walking for hours since their last conversation. Sasuke had felt just a little bit guilty for his comment earlier about not wanting her with him for this. Even if it was true, he shouldn't have told her, and not to mention the way he reacted when she had grabbed his hand. It was because of his guilt that had Sasuke trying to smooth things over by teasing her and then letting his fingers remain too long against hers. To be honest, he had been afraid she would never grab his hand again, and it was thoughts like this that made it essential for Sasuke to prevent any further touches like that between them. How did you find this tower? Sakura asked when they slipped behind the large rock and discovered the crack that led to a narrow cavern. By accident, he responded. There was nothing else to explain. Now, how did he find the entrance? That was a puzzle that took him a full day to put together. Once they made it inside the connecting cave, the darkness engulfed all of their senses, consuming any light that made it through the fracture. On instinct, Sasuke activated his Sharingan, which helped his vision in this blackness. Sakura, however, was walking slowly and cautiously behind him. Sasuke turned and carefully grabbed under Sakura's arm so she wouldn't make a wrong step in the darkness. He told himself that this was okay, considering he was helping her. And it would be a pain if she got injured and slowed them down even further. You are certainly brave, Sakura announced, her voice echoing off the cavern. She kept her hand on the wall as Sasuke helped her maneuver her way to the entrance. Ninja aren't supposed to be scared of the dark, he teased her. The Uchiha could just picture her glare when she replied, I'm not. Sasuke let go of her arm when they made it to the door at the end of the tunnel. He pushed firmly against it and the bottom of the door grated against the floor with a loud scuffing sound. It had been a while since anyone had entered. Even when the door opened, there was no light. Why? Because there wasn't a single window crafted into this tower. Sasuke had learned that the first time he came here. If he hadn't been so accustomed to navigating Orochimaru's hideouts, he would have never discovered the torch hidden on the back of the door, which he grabbed and lit with a spark of his fire style. It was a flame that burned up more of his fading chakra. The darkness is all a part of this place's design, he communicated to a curious Sakura. Kagaya didn't want anyone finding the entrance. And if they did, the darkness was meant to deter them from reaching the top. I see, she replied, shielding her eyes from the sudden brightness of the flame. Their faces were a lot closer than they had expected, and they both immediately took a step back away from each other. But why is this place even here? Sakura quickly asked, peering into the darkness that circled their sphere of firelight. I believe, Sasuke replied, leading the way by flame. A few embers left a trail as he walked. It's because Kagaya needed a place to rest when she ran out of chakra. She nodded and bit her knuckle in deep thought. Obito did tell me that it was an immense time space to connect and travel to, and that it would require a lot of chakra to do so. It would make sense if she had to hole up somewhere in between. My thoughts exactly, he announced when they came upon a stairway. The only strange thing about it was that the first step was 7 feet off the ground. Someone feeling their way around in the dark wouldn't have been able to locate it. When Sasuke had first found it, he had mused that the attempt to hide it had failed, considering how easily he had found it. Sasuke jumped up and landed on the terrace with 2 feet. He turned to reach down to help Sakura, but she was already behind him. He jerked his hand back under his cloak before she noticed. Even though Sasuke considered her his equal, he found himself falling back into his old ways of attending to her like Sasuke, Naruto, and even Kakashi had when they were genin. It seemed that Sakura was analyzing this funhouse, too, for she laughed to herself and said, it's like she wanted to mess with someone's head. What do you mean? Sasuke asked, wondering what secret Sakura thought she was onto. This stairway is a distraction, she said suddenly. If someone happened to find the stairwell, they would think that they had outsmarted Kagaya by doing so, despite it being 7 feet off the ground. They would come this way, thinking that it was the entrance they weren't supposed to notice. I mean, that's what it seems like, a trick. What are you talking about? He asked incredulously, squeezing through another discreet crevice to the right of the top step. On the other side was another stairwell, except it was above the exit you just came out of. So in order to find it, You would have to turn and look up as soon as you finish the first stairwell, in order to find it. Think about it. What's the point of it? The entrance and even the torch was hidden in a place where if someone looked hard enough, they would be able to find it. She jumped and grabbed the bottom step of the new stairwell and swung herself inside. This is a joke. Sasuke's eyebrows rose. This all made perfect sense. This place wasn't a hideout, like he had thought. It was a maze. When he had first located the tower, Sasuke had analyzed every corner. There wasn't a single thing in this place. If Sakura was right, then this probably wasn't Kagaya's hideout at all, but a fake. If Kagaya's enemy found this, they were supposed to be distracted by this place, thinking they were one step closer to having her in their grasp, all while being led on a wild goose chase. This would be a perfect scenario if Kagaya were to make a quick escape. The design wasn't supposed to keep people from discovering it, it was just difficult enough so that when someone did, they thought that they weren't meant to. So, he hadn't found it by accident at all. It was subtly thrown in your face. Brilliant. Sasuke had completely fallen for it. Sakura, however, realized it immediately. Sasuke had truly forgotten how perceptive she was. Her discernment was truly off the charts. And to think he had been stumbling blindly for years, believing everything for its face value. How much time had Sasuke wasted in this dimension only, not including the others? The good news is, Sakura voiced in the dark, a step behind him now, that there are probably several places out here like this, so if anyone's looking for us, they have a few to choose from. Sasuke scowled. It was one of his biggest frustrations, but he had never found anyone else out in any of these dimensions. Each one was deserted. It was also his greatest relief that he hadn't come across anyone yet. It was that double-sided coin where he didn't want to ever find someone with the hope that the threat wasn't real, but yet, he searched for it because he wanted to eliminate it. After the fifth set of stairs and several more obscure but not that obscure passageways, they came to a small chamber. It was a round, somewhat duty space, not larger than 15 feet in diameter. Their light barely illuminated it, revealing the dun-colored stone walls and floor. Besides the carved swirls etched into the stone, there was nothing else in the room. It was the end of the road. Sasuke set the torch in a hook, then slumped down the wall and sighed, completely exhausted from using his Rinnegan. We're stopping? Sakura asked. I need to rest for a few minutes, he admitted, embarrassed because his pride stung by having to do so. She responded by sitting down across from him, as far away as she could get without leaving the room. Which bothered the Uchiha. It had to be because he snapped at her earlier. It was probably for the best. I had chakra pills in my bag, but it's back in the hotel room, she replied across from the wide space between them. He could barely see her because she sat just outside the firelight's circumference. Sorry. Why are you apologizing? He grumbled, feigning annoyance. She dropped her voice as if she were trying to be less noisy to avoid bothering him. If you need my chakra to get back, you can have it. All of it. Sasuke remembered her strength of 100 seal that she inherited from Tsunade, and how she had used it in combination with Obito's Kamui to rescue Sasuke from Kagaya's desert dimension. No, he replied immediately. That would only leave her vulnerable. We'll just spend some time here until I recover. Is this how it always is? She asked boldly and Sasuke frowned. Do you have to rest after you use the Rinnegan each time? It's unwise, he began, trying to play this answer where he still came out looking good, to travel to more than one dimension at a time. I have to reserve just enough chakra in case I come across an enemy. It's not enough to go back in one go. After I rest for the night, I should have enough to send us back soon. We could stay, Sakura offered, fingering the ends of her hair shyly. Her statement had Sasuke jerking up his head to acknowledge her statement in surprise. Why would she possibly be offering to stay in this horrible place? I could help you, you know. It's why I am here. It's not my intention to be a useless weight to you. Sakura, He began, then stopped. Could they stay? If Sakura were with him, maybe he'd be able to find out something important he had missed. Was that a selfish thought? Using her genius to help his goal. That's something the old Sasuke would do, wasn't it? No, he continued. Staying here for too long is a risk. Even if it's just a couple of days. No. She leaned forward, her face finally coming into the light. But, he snapped again, I'm not risking it. He glared at her, daring her to argue with him again. She had that stubborn set to her jaw that made Sasuke panic. His voice grew quiet as he explained. It was foolish of me to bring you here. You're in more danger here than you were back in that hotel room. You were never supposed to come back here. I'm sorry. See, Sakura said, pulling her chin to her chest, resigned to let him have his way. It's when you say stuff like that I. She bit her tongue to stop her speech and looked up at him to gauge whether or not she should finish what she was about to say. Sasuke didn't ask, and Sakura didn't offer anything more than a redirected gaze. After a minute, she leaned back against the wall and her face was shrouded in darkness again. The only thing Sasuke could see was the outline of her shadow and her illuminated legs as they were crossed at the ankle. We'll go back in the morning, he finally spoke. The flame was dying and Sasuke didn't have the energy to keep it lit. Fortunately, this place was neither hot nor cold, so they wouldn't freeze to death without a fire. He expected her to argue, to say that they had unfinished business here, but she didn't. All she said was, to the sand, it is. Sasuke nodded and leaned his head back against the wall. How could she convince Sasuke to let her help him? How could she make him realize that Kagaya had created an elaborate mousetrap when she made these dimensions? The more Sakura thought about all of the different realms and thought back to her time in them, the more firmly Sakura believed there was a secret to them. All these thoughts Sakura had as she watched Sasuke drift off to sleep. The Uchiha had taken an arms crossed, eyes closed, casual posture against the far wall, and it took her a minute to realize he had actually fallen asleep since there was no change in his stance to indicate the shift. Sasuke often had the likeness of a statue without any feelings. She sighed quietly to herself. Sakura had almost told him that when Sasuke sounded worried for her, she often believed him to have feelings for her. She almost confessed how confused he often made her and that he reminded her of this place, full of tricks. Sakura didn't know if she should be trying to figure out if his feelings were more complex than what he displayed to her. Sasuke, too, was a mystery that Sakura just couldn't figure out. And if she couldn't figure him out, how could she ever hope to help him reach his goal? Sakura had been excited when she realized the purpose of this tower. She had felt useful to him for just a minute, until he had told her that she was in danger here. If Sasuke constantly felt concern for her, then she was never going to earn his respect. A sudden fire bursting to life within her, Sakura quietly stood to her feet. The torch had almost completely faded, and like the ninja she was, Sakura used the darkness to her advantage. She glided silently through it until she reached the door. Let Sasuke get his rest. If they were going to be leaving for Suna tomorrow, then Sakura only had a few hours to make the most of her visit to this dimension. The door conceded without so much as a squeak from its dusty hinges. Sasuke thought it was the sudden light of sunrise that was signaling the instincts within his body to wake. That is, until a growing warmth began to bloom over his face and a sweat beaded across his forehead. The Uchiha sucked in a sharp breath and opened his eyes. An orb of orange flame hovered a couple of feet in front of his face and Sasuke had to blink several times before his eyes could adjust enough to recognize the stooped frame illuminated just behind it. Sasuke jerked back away from the flame as he croaked hoarsely, "What the?" He coughed on his own words, his throat strangely dry. "You're finally awake." Sakura's voice floated softly across the short space between them. Finally, the torch was withdrawn and Sasuke let out a small sigh of relief. The torch was quickly replaced with a pale hand that touched the sweaty plane of his brow. I'm starting to think that you might be sick. I'm starting to think you're annoying and crazy, he moaned, glancing around him. It took the Uchiha a second to recall where exactly he was. They were still in Kagaya's tower, up the stairs and in this pitch-black room. He couldn't tell how much time had passed since he'd fallen asleep. You've been asleep for almost 24 hours. Sakura whispered loudly, almost as if she was afraid to overwhelm his senses. Sasuke was grateful because he suddenly felt a little disoriented. Perhaps he had exhausted himself more than he had thought. When Sasuke thought about it, more time usually stretched between his uses of the Rinnegan. Yes, he had spent almost a week and a half in the village and had roamed aimlessly outside of the realms for a week before he had even decided to turn towards Konoha. So essentially, he had had almost 2.5 weeks to recover most of his chakra just to blow it on coming here. Thankfully, by only teleporting to the core dimension, Sasuke had only used 1/4 of the reserves he normally spent. It was a complicated math problem. His donuts needed enough chakra to get him to the core dimension and then enough to open any of the other connected realms, all of which used varying levels of chakra, and still more to do those same steps but in reverse, not to mention that he needed chakra to save in case he encountered an enemy. This was Sasuke's biggest problem while searching for Kagaya. He felt like so much of his time was wasted just on letting his body recover enough to jump between realms, and the Uchiha already felt like time was slipping between his fingers. Just how much longer did he have? This was why they needed to leave, to go to the Sand Village so that Sasuke might conduct an experiment and test a theory of his. Lost in thought, Sasuke's eyes had drifted closed again despite the glaring light of the flame in front of him. If he was this tired, he must have emptied himself more than he thought, probably not taking into account that he had to use extra by bringing Sakura with him here. Would he have enough to take them home? Suddenly, a green glow replaced the flame's brightness and Sasuke jumped when the palm on his forehead pressed harder. Without meaning to, Sasuke leaned into the cool, green brilliance of Sakura's fingers. When Sasuke's head began to clear, he let himself absorb the chakra, his body greedily accepting it. But then, an image of his former red-haired teammate pushing her scarred skin between his teeth had Sasuke reaching up and pulling Sakura's hand down. He wasn't the person to do that sort of thing anymore. That's enough, he croaked, throat still scratchy from little use. Don't be silly, she whispered again as her fingertips moved to his throat and began glowing again, healing this part of him too. We need to get you out of this room. Sasuke stared up at her. Her face was dirty, and he was suddenly aware of just how long 24 hours must have seemed like to her and in this perpetual darkness. You could have woken me up sooner. She stuck her tongue out at him. Says the grump who growled at me just seconds ago for waking him. In answer, Sasuke growled. Just for good measure, so the pink-haired Kunoichi wouldn't forget. That bright sound of her giggle escaping her mouth had the thought of a smirk coming to Sasuke's mind, but when the Kunoichi reached out, grabbed his tunic and practically lifted him to his feet, Sasuke snarled again, all joking aside. That damn strength surprised him every time, not to mention that by doing such a thing, she made Sasuke feel a little feeble. He hissed when his weight settled to his stiff ankles. He rolled his shoulders and cracked his neck to disguise the sound. Sakura giggled again, obviously taking much delight in his current predicament. Come on, she tugged on his elbow, purposefully avoiding his hand, and Sasuke began to walk forward, focused on the woman in front of him. Little steps, she almost said to him after pulling him forward. But with her hand on his arm and their bodies so close in this dimness, Sakura didn't let the words escape her mouth in case he might misread her meaning. In truth, she was starving. It was the reason she had finally woken him. Now the way in which she woke him could have been different, but the medical side of her couldn't help but make an experiment out of it though, seeing how his body would respond to the light after being submerged in night for a 24-hour period. It took her a long time to reignite that infuriating torch so that she might mimic the sun. Sasuke didn't know, hadn't realized that he had been by himself for hours at a time during his deep sleep. Sakura had left him soon after he had gone under. Sakura had left that room with a sense of thrilling determination, eager and hopeful to finally prove her usefulness to the Uchiha. However, after marching aimlessly around for hours, Sakura found, well, not much. Okay. She found nothing. She had searched for 3 hours inside this confusing maze of a tower looking for everything and anything that might be useful to them: structures, forms of writing or symbols, patterns of similarities or differences. There just wasn't anything. At best, Sakura was able to figure out and easily navigate this entire damn maze within that time. Each tunnel and every turn brought her back to that single room in which Sasuke remained sleeping. Each time she re-entered, Sasuke would stir, years of ninja instincts alerting him to her coming and going. Sleep, she had whispered as she placed her glowing hand over his eyes and sent a soothing sensation down through her chakra, and he had fallen back into sleep. Sakura did feel guilty for that, coaxing his body back into a sleep. She had only done it once, but Sasuke had stopped stirring after that. So Sakura had taken advantage of the situation and left the tower completely. She was gone for 4 hours that time. Wherever the light was coming from, Sakura didn't know, but it never darkened in this dimension, a sky always alight with a sun that never warmed or set. The medical ninja didn't like it, but the tower's darkness made a lot more sense taking that fact into consideration. But why, who, other than Kagaya, had ever made use of it? Sakura had been determined to find something out. It was with this conviction that had the kunoichi marching through the rising and falling dunes for 2 hours after that, looking back and forth for a sign of anything at all. But this dimension was like a red, rocky desert that never changed. There wasn't another tower within that 2-hour radius like she was hoping. She had even kicked through the dirt in search of any living thing, but there was nothing, so she stomped her foot into the red rock and turned on her heel back towards the tower. When Sakura had arrived, Sasuke was still sleeping silently and soundly in the dark, so she had curled up against the opposite wall and let her frustration pull her own body under. When she woke, Sakura sat up and was surprised to see that Sasuke still slept. It was then that she suspected her influence earlier had placed the Uchiha in a deep sleep, a sleep his body desperately needed. But she also wondered if he was sick, which was why his body was so eager for the rest. So she watched him even breathing for another hour or two, but then her empty stomach began to growl. Now, as she led Sasuke through the maze, she desperately wished she were leading him to some big discovery, or some secret she had found. This was what she had wanted, and now felt disappointed because she was missing out on the chance to do so. Sakura supposed it made sense that if Sasuke hadn't found anything, she wouldn't have had much of a chance either. He had been doing this for quite a while. So she was going to pretend that none of it had happened. It was far less embarrassing to act as if she hadn't searched at all than to admit she had and didn't find anything. She sighed. I've never slept that long at one time, Sasuke admitted curiously to her, which was unlike himself. He never admitted to anything at all, let alone force it to sound somewhat sorry for it. Was he suspicious of her actions? There's no way, she thought to herself. Sakura forced out an innocent laugh. It's a good thing to catch up on some much-needed rest. Take it as advice from your doctor. The Uchiha scoffed but didn't say anything else after that, even though Sakura could feel his scowling stare between her shoulder blades. She just kept marching. When they finally made it to the cave, Sasuke turned back towards the tower's hidden door, firmly snuffed out the torch, and replaced it back in its hidden position behind the door's frame. The sudden blackness around them afterwards was suffocating, but when she felt Sasuke's fingertips brush her elbow, in the same way that her own had reached for his over and over, Sakura let her smile break the seam of her own lips. It was short-lived, because Sakura froze when her eyes adjusted enough to make out Sasuke's Sharingan, which almost seemed to glow in the darkness, watching that smile. She knew the Uchiha had seen when he withdrew his fingers. She regretted the smile, then. Come on, he said emotionlessly, walking ahead of her in the gloom. This time, he didn't grab her arm or help her stumble her way out as he had helped her when they had first come upon the cave yesterday. There was no wind that hit them when they finally walked into the light, but rather a brightness that was dead and airless. It didn't fill Sakura with the warmth that she had instinctively expected it to. Sasuke finally spoke, announcing, "We need to make it back to the same spot in which we teleported." Sakura snapped her head in his direction. What for? That would mean they would have to trek for several more hours. It is much easier to connect a vast time-space if you teleport through a door that was previously opened before, Sasuke explained, running his palm through his hair. It's almost like once there is a rip in space, it leaves a wound that can be reopened. He was speaking in a language that Sakura could easily understand, being a medical ninja. If the skin has been recently penetrated, it is easy to reopen. But once the skin scars, it becomes stronger than before. But then, Sakura assessed, if too much time has passed. Exactly, Sasuke confirmed her thinking. The seal becomes almost permanent. It would take a vast amount of chakra to break back through it again. Makes sense, she replied, shuffling her feet in the dirt. It's a lot more complicated than I had imagined. Sasuke nodded, took a breath, and took the first step of their lengthy hike across the dunes. Sakura observed his fixed posture and confident step, but the dark-haired ninja wasn't fooling her. She knew he was trying to figure out how to get them home without completely draining himself of chakra. But there was something she hadn't yet considered. Catching up with him, she leaned forward and asked, "If we go back to the hotel, won't we be walking back into an uncertain situation? I mean, those ninja could be waiting for us." "Perhaps," Sasuke admitted. "Hopefully enough time has passed for them to have moved on, and they might not be expecting us to return there. But you are right. We need a plan." Suddenly, an idea began to form within Sakura's mind. She halted in her tracks, a bit of dust rising around her, and said, "I have one." Stopping too, Sasuke raised an eyebrow at her. He was waiting for her to explain, which was a nostalgic feeling for Sakura. He was listening to her again, like he had when they were genin, taking her opinions into consideration and contemplating her viewpoints. "What if I helped you?" she announced hopefully, "like I offered before. If she used the hundred's healing mark, then they might have enough chakra where they didn't have to make the journey." "Absolutely not," Sasuke deadpanned, instantly turning off his reception of her by rotating away again. Sakura set her teeth in fury and frustration, but she didn't move her body an inch. Her plan made the most sense. Sasuke was low in chakra while she had been slowly storing a mass amount of it in the seal on her forehead. If she let Sasuke rely on his power alone, then they were forced to use their previous door because it took the least amount of chakra to access. By doing so, their location would undoubtedly put them at a disadvantage if their foes were still occupying that space around the hotel. And it would leave Sasuke vulnerable if his power was back at zero. She didn't really understand why Sasuke was saying no to this. He had slept for 24 hours just so they wouldn't have to rely on her strength of 100 seal. Whether it was because he was being noble or something else, Sakura didn't care. If she let him use up his chakra, how was she any better? Sakura Haruno glared at Sasuke's back. She was quite tired of seeing him leading the way before her. As a kunoichi, Sakura thought she had proven herself, was going to walk shoulder to shoulder with Naruto and Sasuke from now on. But there he was, marking the path ahead. No more. No more. Dot 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 dot. There was a sudden wind that brushed the back of Sasuke's neck and he felt a silent roar of chakra spread across the range of ground behind him. He turned, taken aback, and clenched his teeth in surprised irritation at the teammate whose beaming grin glowed as brightly as the tangible chakra emanating from her body. Those searing, Bright green eyes were directed towards the sky as she flexed her hands, open, close, open, close. Sasuke followed her gaze when it fell to the black marks running from her palms, up her shoulders, and to the crisscross X on her brow. Then her eyes landed on him. Sasuke had to admit that the kunoichi was honestly quite brilliant to look at like that, rejuvenated by and delighting in her own power, feeling it electrify and exhilarate her as it began coursing down the pathways. But his annoyance with her focused his mind and Sasuke glowered in response. She was defying his wishes and purposely breaking the seal to force him into a decision. Sasuke didn't quite appreciate that, but was he going to waste this opportunity? Yes, he was. He would prove to her once and for all that he was changing. That he was done using people. She began to walk towards him, and Sasuke didn't break their mutual stare, hers one of mighty determination and his an icy challenge. He'd be damned if he used her power. Coming to stand before him, in all her strength, Sasuke broke her gaze to focus on that glowing purple diamond in the center of that large temple of hers. Everything about it was so annoying. It came out as a stuttering hiss. She grinned wickedly at the word and reached out, taking his hand firmly in her own. Her grip was so firm that Sasuke couldn't jerk away this time. He found himself glowering viciously, all amusement gone from his red and purple eyes. "You are annoying," she said softly, letting her chakra graze against his skin in silent offering. "Let me help you. Quit being so damn stubborn." Sasuke set his teeth again. He almost said no, without giving her any further explanation, but then Sakura spoke again, as if their linked hands were somehow transferring his thoughts to her. "Relying upon your friends is not the same as using them. Let us work together so that we can complement one another's weaknesses with our strengths. Let's balance each other." Sasuke stared at this woman who was offering him a partnership that depended on one another, like they had had in the past. It had existed between them before, that bond of friendship that seemed to connect the two of them not only in ability, but emotions as well. He had tried to sever that type of partnership with her before. If he did this, would he be letting her in? Would he be acknowledging that bond of camaraderie between them? What if he let her in and then she was taken away from him? What would that do to him, them, by working together now? Open the portal. Another minute of hesitation. His jaw loosened and Sasuke took a nervous breath as he replayed her words over and over. "Relying upon your friends is not the same as using them. Let us work together. Become each other's balance." "It's okay," she reassured him. "Open it." Sasuke tilted his head so that his hair fell away from the Rinnegan. His breathing turned shallow as he finally conceded and a black pinprick in the air around them began to expand. A sudden rush of energy flowed into his veins as black stripes began to spiral slowly up his arms. He looked at his teammate in amazement, at their joined hands now being wrapped together with bands of black chakra. It almost looked like they were being tied together. When the markings reached his neck and crawled up his chin, Sasuke inhaled sharply, as if he were getting his first full gulp of fresh air since being in this damn place. His exhausted body welcomed the chakra, feasting on it as it had back in the tower. He flinched in self-repulsion, but Sakura breathed hard and directed more of her power into him. Where his body begged, her chakra was there to instantly feed it. When the strips of charcoal reached his own forehead, Sasuke focused intently on the portal. It jumped in response to Sakura's chakra, flaring and expanding large enough to finally walk through. He glanced back at her and noticed a sheen now coating her own forehead. That's when Sasuke suddenly realized what she was doing. The jutsu demanded chakra and she was acting as a direct current, bypassing Sasuke's chakra entirely, not allowing any of his energy to be used, but hers only. She was sending it all, every bit of her own chakra to back the jutsu. Now in a sudden panic, Sasuke breathed, "Stop. That's enough." Sakura's green eyes became unfocused and her heartbeat quickened rapidly. Her breathing came in sharp inhales and exhales. Yelling now, he warned, "Sakura. I said stop. He couldn't let go of her hand. Sakura wasn't listening to him. She was dedicating her entire focus to the jutsu. Sasuke did the only thing he could think to do. He wrapped his fingers up and around the wrist of her clasping hand and pulled them through the portal. Thanks for watching.